Welcome to the Paranormal Pendle podcast, coming to you from the heart of Pendle Witch Country in the northwest of England. My name is Craig Bryant, author, investigator and collector of stories. Join me as we take a journey into the paranormal, UFO sightings, cryptozoology and big cats. This is the Paranormal Pendle podcast. Welcome to episode 18 of Paranormal Pendle, and this is the first episode of 2022. We're broadcasting to the Paranormal UK radio network at paukradio.com. So for the first episode of 2022, I'm delighted that my guest is Richard Rokeby, who is an author, a researcher with a keen interest in history, mysteries and forbidden knowledge. He has previously served in the British Army and the UK Police. He holds an advanced certificate in education from Canterbury Christ Church University. He's a qualified police detective and has diplomas in criminology and ufology. And he lives in Warwickshire and he's married with 3 children. So, Richard, thank you very much for coming on the episode. Really pleased to talk to you.
That's all right, Craig. Thanks ever so much for inviting me.
Yeah, no problem. I suppose really I'd just like to start off with a little bit of background about yourself. Really how your interest in ufology started.
Well, I suppose I've been a child of the 70s. I suppose we have a lot of influences around that time. Sort of Star Wars was just sort of coming onto the scene. And a couple of other films as well, which is Close Encounters of the Third Kind and E.T., sort of all came at about the same time. And they sort of piqued an interest in me, particularly Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which I think is probably close, as time goes on, seems to be closer and closer to the truth. But, as a contrast to Star Wars, which is all sort of fantastical stuff, Close Encounters felt very real and felt as though you could sort of reach out and touch it and interact with what was going on. So I think that started my interest. And then back in the day when you used to walk into libraries, I used to just go into the library and grab a few books on UFOs and read through them, over the summer, whatever. So I built up an interest there and then never really did anything with it, but it was always on the back of my mind. Started watching some programs on the various channels and the hundreds of thousands of channels you get nowadays, and Ancient Aliens really caught my attention. I think that's a fantastic program. I think it's wearing a bit thin now, but back in the first 10, 11 series or something, it was fantastic just to look at different aspects of the phenomena from different angles.
Yeah.
So that got me back into it, really. And then I'd been carrying this story or this idea for a book around for about 20 years.
Yeah.
And as we sort of went into lockdown, that seemed a good opportunity to try and put something down. So and that's how the book came about, really. It was originally supposed to be a couple of articles.
Yeah.
Excuse me, but I had a chat with the great Philip Mantle, of course, and from Flying Disc Press, and he suggested we turn it into a book. There's just enough for a book. It's quite a concise book, but there was enough there for a book. So the book was produced, and we're really pleased with it. Really pleased with the feedback I've got, and it's people seem to genuinely enjoy it. Families or people, not just people UFO enthusiasts, but local history enthusiasts and people like to read the book and then go to the area and have a look around for themselves. So yeah, it's all gone really well.
So the book is called The Lights Upon the Hills, and it's about the Burton Dassett UFO events of 1923. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, I know absolutely nothing about this event. So if you could tell us a little bit about it, that'd be
good.
Of
course. Yeah. So I suppose it started off with a series of sightings in the Burton Dassett Hills. So the Burton Dasset Hills are in Warwickshire, where I now live. It's about maybe 10 miles south from me. It's about 30 miles south of Birmingham, 20 miles or so north of Oxford, and Warwickshire, for your international listeners, if you like, is it's a relatively flat county. It's sort of rolling fields and rolling countryside.
Yeah.
And the Burton Dasset Hills, although not particularly high, I think they come up to the highest point is about 260 meters. They do stand out. They are quite prominent in the area because there's nothing out west until you start getting to the Malvern Hills.
Yeah.
And then onto Wales, etc. And then out east, it sort of runs down perhaps Bradgate Park a bit further north, and then it goes down basically to the Wash and the Fens, so it gets flatter as you go on.
Yeah.
So it is quite a unique area, if you like, in this part of the world, and it's got sort of 5 hills, 2 sort of big hills at the back, which are part of the sort of countryside that raise the level, and then 3 sort of prominent hills at the front. And Burton Dasset Park, it's now a country park, so people spend their weekends and walk their dogs there and park up and look at the views. It's the only way really to get an overview of the counties.
Yeah.
So that's what it is now. But back in medieval times, there was a small village there. It has a church, which no doubt I'll come on to, but nothing really marked it out as note, other than it was quite high. But the village was fairly successful when the markets were big during the sort of Middle Ages. And then a number of sort of evil landlords and the Black Death helped to sort of thin out the population. It was abandoned in the medieval times. Yeah. And then it was just known as a sort of local area. People would obviously go to the church still and walk up and down the hills. It sort of picked up again in just before the First World War as an iron ore mine. There's a number of iron ore mines that were put there, and there was a train line put up, and that was to move the iron ore onto the main line. So it's quite well serviced by trains, and there's a London-Birmingham train not too far, train line not too far away. And it sort of carried on its own and until 1922, 23, when we start to get a series of reports appearing in the local papers and national papers of people sort of seeing lights of all different colours, generally red, white, bluish tints, but at different times, moving at different speeds, different altitudes, and causing what the term a bit of a flap. And people were going up and reporting seeing them, and then it got to such a fever pitch around about February 1923 that the London papers were sending up reporters, Birmingham, and where I got a lot of my reports from was the Banbury Gazette. Right. And they were sort of making reports of these lights that were being seen on the hills.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because 1923, I mean, obviously there was air travel at the time, but not in any quantity that we have today. So, I mean, when you see lights in the sky today, the first thing you think of is could it be an aircraft? I suppose back in 1923, they might have had a slightly different outlook on what it could be. I mean, I think what I'm trying to get at was there a thought initially that it could be aircraft of some type, or did that not sort of enter into the reports?
No, it didn't really. Of course, if it was reported today now, we'd say it's drones.
Yeah,
and the way that they were reported in 1923 was quite similar to that. So relatively small lights, described as the size of perhaps a car headlamp, motorbike headlamp, moving around. There was one report of a figure being in one of the lights, so obviously they would have been a bit bigger. But but they weren't really attributed to aircraft. Aircraft 1923, so just 20 or so years after the Wright brothers.
Yeah.
Was still, obviously we'd had the a massive sort of boost of the First World War in terms of technology, but there's still predominantly loud, big biplanes, noisy biplanes, particularly in private hands. So, it wasn't really aircraft. It was people believed with absolute good reason that they were ghosts.
Okay.
And they were often described as ghosts or spirits. Or Dr. David Clarke did a really good paper many years ago called Spook Lights, which is about the same incident of the lights being seen. It doesn't go into further details around the surrounding area and looked at it holistically a bit like I have, but he still did a very good paper on it. So Spook Lights are sort of known, but I think the idea of they were ghosts really came from after the First World War, the interest in spiritualism and mediumship increased.
Yeah.
Because people, not just the First World War, but the Spanish flu, which is obviously very current at the moment as well. But people wanted to believe that they would see their sort of children and relatives again. So it was a known practice that if lights were reported or ghosts were reported in a certain area, it wasn't common by any means, but it was reported elsewhere in the country, around that sort of time, that people would go as a bit of a sort of jaunt, bit of a trip out. Well, let's go up the hills and see if we can see the ghosts or see the lights.
Yeah.
So I could completely understand why, in the context of the time, before the term UFO had been coined or anything like that was known about, really. Then people put the lights down to ghosts.
That's interesting. Did you manage to find any sort of first-hand accounts then of the lights? Did anybody give interviews to the papers and that? You said a lot of the bigger metropolitan papers came to have a look.
Yeah, so my book is based on sort of two main sources. So the first one is the Banbury Gazette. They seem to record most of the accounts, and there's a reporter there that discusses coming up and being a bit skeptical, I guess, as reporters are, and then having this, and then sort of seeing the lights, and speaking to the locals, and then the other sort of source was quite an old book now called Ghosts of Warwickshire, written by Betty Smith, who was a sort of well-respected local historian, and she did this book, which was a series of short chapters around different ghosts around Warwickshire. But this one chapter, when I first read it, sort of stood out to me, and it was only 2 or 3 pages, and it described the lights on Burton Dasset Hills, and it's included in a ghost book because people thought they were ghosts. But when I read it, I thought this sounds to me through the prism of the modern understanding around UAPs and UFOs. This sounds like a mass UFO event, and really that was the angle I sort of give the book. But to answer your question, Craig, there is I think I've got about 6 or 7 accounts in the book, which ranged from the maids that were working in the vicarage, to motorcyclists travelling back home late at night, to a signal box man for the railway line that saw an orange orb, what described as an orange orb, appear outside the front of his signal box.
Okay.
And he was so concerned that he actually rang the local police,
right,
to come out to it, and they did attend. So there is I think it's 7 or 8 sort of accounts detailed in the book. So it was well recorded. Some names have been lost to history, others we know, but there was certainly, it was probably seen by hundreds of people.
Okay.
It was just that the paper managed to get hold and track down and get sort of accounts from a number of them.
So were the accounts similar? Were people seeing similar things, or were they seeing different? I mean, you mentioned different coloured lights. Were they at different heights or different distances?
Yeah. I think they were broadly similar in as much as they were fairly small, relatively small.
Okay.
Sometimes they're described as, look as if they're looking for something, so moving in an organized pattern. Sometimes it'd be one, sometimes it'd be three or four. Sometimes they'd just be doing their own thing, bobbing along, over the undulating hills. Other times there was an account where a lady in one of the bigger houses there, which could have been the vicarage. We can't exactly tie down which house it was, but there is quite a nice, vicarage next to the church. But we say vicarage, it's close to a sort of country pile. It's quite a big sort of manor house, really. And there is an account that at one point the light illuminated a room sufficiently enough that people could read by. Whether they did read by, I don't know, but wow. They used the description that it illuminated the room, so they could read by it. So, what technology was around at that time that could do that? Well, certainly nothing that could fly, if you like. But the old searchlights for the Zeppelins could probably produce that amount of light. But that's that's not what it was. It was described as a small light that chose to light up a room.
Yeah.
So I think there was some intelligence behind it. Behind that, they don't seem to be random. I discuss in the book the Norway lights, the ones that go down the the valleyways in Norway. Okay. And to me, they seem more of a natural phenomena.
Yeah, and I've never heard of that. Yeah, sorry, I've never heard of those actually. So
yeah, I'm trying to remember the name of the place now, but I think it's called the Winfarnen lights or the Wilfarden lights. Okay. I have sort of wrote a little bit about it, but they seem to be more of a natural phenomenon.
Right.
But these lights do seem to be under some sort of intelligent control. I say there was only one report of someone who says that they thought they saw a figure in the lights, but for me, I think there's some sort of perhaps artificial intelligence. If we're saying that they're UFOs or UAPs, they're perhaps closer to probes, than organic sort of beings, if you like.
Yeah, that's the sort of impression that I'm getting from what you're describing, that there's sort of like probes or some sort of small craft that might not necessarily have a shall we say a creature inside it, the more sort of remote control. Was there any indication that there might have been a bigger ship that had been seen, or bigger lights?
Yeah, it's a good question, Craig. No, there wasn't really. No, there wasn't. There was nothing. There was no sort of huge Independence Day type flying, craft anywhere in the area. It was just these lights, and it seemed to go between a specific period as well.
Okay.
Between that sort of late December 22 to February 1923,
right.
Which I think as well. If it was happening all the time, it said that's more of a natural phenomenon. But this was well documented between those sort of 2 or 3 months over the Christmas period. So clearly they weren't there all the time. So they were going somewhere else at some point. But they were being drawn to that area. And I speculate in the book why that was. Was it something to do with the topography of the area? Was it something to do with the iron ore?
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, as you were telling me, I've been scribbling notes down, and I actually wrote iron ore with a question mark next to it, because I do believe that the topography of the land and the geological makeup of land can be almost like a magnet for certain types of unexplained phenomena. We have similar things around here. I live quite close to Pendle Hill, and we have similar things around here as well. It's not only well known for witchcraft, but it's also very well known for UFOs and UAPs. So that's interesting. I mean, you mentioned about the sort of lay of the land, the makeup of the land. I mean, I assume that it's all sort of just pasture and slightly elevated. There's no marshes or anything like that could perhaps produce marsh gas or something like that.
Well, I mean, it does seem to be the ufologist's nemesis, isn't it? It's swamp gas, and swamp gas was blamed or attributed to these lights at one point, but that seems to be based around one particular sighting, a chap by the name of I think it's George Cattrall. Okay. He was a local groom, so he worked with the horses in the stables, and he was leading a horse back from, so there's sort of two villages, Fenny Compton and North End, which sort of bookend the hills, and he was leading the horse back through North End. And when he saw what was described as a bluish reddish light hovering above a pool. So this was sort of February time, 1923, and that report was captured as well. And then what happened was, even back in 1923, the idea of swamp gas, marsh gas, dysphosphorus fluorescent gas, is the sort of chemical makeup of it. Was sort of attributed to it, but once you do a bit of research into marsh gas or swamp gas, you realise it is quite small. It's a bit like a blue flame from the old Bunsen burners used to get in school. It can move, but it sort of doesn't last for very long. It'll only move a couple of meters or so, then it will burn out. And it's really difficult to produce, and generally it's produced in hot, wet environments. And Warwickshire is quite wet in February, but it's by no means hot.
No.
So, and today is good testament to that, because it's freezing here. But so to give it some, it was that sort of excuse. Even back in 1923 was true that it'd be marsh gas, and then the Times did an article on it in 2002, 2003. Sort of the 80th anniversary of it or so,
right?
And the reporter there, and the report is in the book. They sort of believed that it was swamp gas, marsh gas, that was causing all of the all of the sightings, which of course it couldn't be, and certainly I think. If you spent any time with horses, generally they're not that fazed by naturally occurring events, but they are by things that are sort of mechanical, etc. So, so that was put forward as a possible explanation.
So did the horse react badly then to this, or
So
okay,
so they give the description of the horse. Sort of acting up, rearing up, which I think was probably maybe just reading between the lines, maybe what caught the groom's attention, I guess. But I think these reasons are often given. It would have been at the time to say, well, these aren't ghosts; this is swamp gas, but.
They just tend to try and find an explanation, don't they? That doesn't necessarily fit. It just makes them feel better that they've solved the mystery in effect.
Yeah, and I think actually the Operation Blue Book with Dr. Hynek, etc. That didn't, it was soon becoming, they lost a lot of credibility by blaming a lot on that. People were seeing all sorts of crafts with orange lights and triangle crafts and. But if there was anywhere near a pool, they were saying, it could be marsh gas. And it's not what's being described.
No.
And I give a couple of examples in the book. But just to go back on your point there, because I'm interested in what you said around Pendle Hill, etc. And how the makeup of a place can affect what happens there.
Mm.
It's the Hessdalen lights in Norway, and if you've not seen it, Craig, then it's probably worth just googling a few things about it, and it is really interesting as to what is causing that. And there's a whole range of theories, and some, but it seems to be quite regularly observed.
Mm.
So that'd be worth looking at, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's something. It's a theory that, I mean, I'm not saying that the geology, the makeup of an area, necessarily means that any unexplained event that happens there you can explain away by it being natural. I tend to subscribe more to the theory that it acts as a magnet almost for phenomena that you can't necessarily just explain away as being natural. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned about the iron ore, because that almost, there was like a big light bulb appeared above my head when you were talking about that, because that to me would seem to suggest that, I mean, do you think that it was that was bringing these lights into the area?
If I'm honest, I'm not sure what it was. It could have contributed to it, but I think you're right about that point you make about certain areas, and certain areas seem to attract these type of phenomena and sort of mystical events. But I suspect they've always done it. Going back to ancient Britons, or all the way back perhaps to Stone Age time or Bronze Age times. I just think certain areas, I think the Wiltshire Downs, obviously you've got Avebury and Stonehenge and all these sort of fantastic places there. But there was something very special, I think, about that area. There's a different glow to it in the sun because of the chalk. Yeah. There's a different glow and Glastonbury and these sort of places. I just think of an intrinsically special, and they've always attracted, for whatever reason, they've always attracted phenomena to it. And within its history of Burton Dasset, I think the church does play a part, and I think that the church is describing within its artwork and carvings, a fantastic event that happened either 600 years ago, or perhaps 1200 years ago, or perhaps even longer.
Right.
And I think I do think it's these areas that just attract them. There's areas in Scotland, in the northeast, Pendle will be one. Even parts of London. I spent a lot of time in London, and if you're in the city of London, there is deep history there. And you go to places like St. Paul's Cathedral, there's always been some religious significance, the area. And you've got the sort of the temples of Mithra and all that underneath the banks and everything. Yeah. I think there's just these areas around the country that are sort of wells for it, I guess. Wells for mystical phenomena.
Yeah, that's a good way of describing it, actually. I'm just interested in what you mentioned about the church. Then, I mean, first of all, how old is the church, do you think, or have you got a rough idea when it was built? And secondly, really, you mentioned about some sort of depiction within the church. I mean, can you go into a little bit more detail about that? Because I find that really interesting, actually.
Yeah. So I think in more general terms, I think what I've done with the book is I've just looked at a number of different anomalies in the area, which suggest that there is something that has gone on here that may go on again and has been going on for some time. Okay. And one of which is the church. So the church was originally a Saxon nave. It was detailed in the Domesday Book, 1087, I think the Domesday Book was, as a Saxon nave, and then it seemed to get. It's in a bit of a, so it's up on the hills, but it's in a bit of a dip within the hills. And if you didn't know it was there, you might well miss it because the road goes sort of above it. But when you get there, you realise it got a major investment, probably around about the 14th century, the Normans would have expanded it, but then around about the 14th century, it got quite a big investment. And as you go in, it's All Saints Church. As you go in through the north door, so in within churches or around churches, the north side of the church is traditionally held to be the evil side.
Okay.
So you know, the altar would obviously be east.
Yeah.
Generally where it is, but the north side would generally have all where the gargoyles are, etc. on churches, and that was to be the north side, and the main entrance is on the north side. And as you walk through, you're met above the main doorway by lots of orbs that have been carved out of the stone. So, you know, in churches you'll often see something quite ornate or a proverb or something, and within the church, as you first walk in, there's just these stone orbs, which is sort of unusual in itself. But then as you walk into the church, you know, I describe it in the book as sort of expansive but sparse. So it's a huge space, and it's sometimes called the Cathedral in the Hills, or the Cathedral in the Cotswolds, the church. But it's not like Roslin Chapel, where, you know, people who have been there will know it's sort of crammed full, and every single bit of stonework or you know, surface has got some sort of ornate carving or picture on it. This isn't like this at all. It would be a traditional sort of quite Spartan church, but just on the north side only. So again, to that evil side, the columns that support the roof at the column bases, where they have the stone that goes up to support the roof, they are carved, and there is other churches with carvings on. It's not that unique, but it's not commonplace.
Yeah.
But within the carvings as well, I think are interesting, because the carvings depict, you know, fairly normal scenes. Some, you know, on some of the pillars, hunting scenes, etc. But other ones, the first one as you go in is a green man is depicted.
Right.
So the green man is, and I know you'll know this better than I will, Craig, so please add into it. But the green man is an old English ancient symbol, and it's a man using but the face and in this case the body as well is often depicted by plants and vegetables, etc. Yeah. So there's a green man in there, and the green man, my understanding is that it represents the joining of two cultures, or, you know, so traditionally in the church it was to do with paganism and Christianity coming together. And again, I don't think, you know, it has occurred elsewhere where there's green men in churches, but it's still pretty rare. And again, when you take it into context with everything else, but, you know, is it saying something else? Is it, you know, joining of two of the worlds, perhaps, two of the civilizations, etc. But I just think it's really interesting it's there. But then there is other carvings. There is a carving of a half man, half dragon type creature, which again is unusual for a church. And then my favorite, there is a chase scene, so a hunting scene, but the two of the animals are carved as if they're upside down. So you've got the horse and the dogs chasing around, and then the dogs, the two of the animals, which I think are a sheep and something else, and a deer, are carved upside down. So almost as if they've been levitated, and the idea is that they're up in the sky. So I think that's really interesting, and, you know, obviously there's pictures in the book, and people can make their own mind up. And then there is the medieval artwork. So I'm no expert in medieval art at all, but I've done a bit of research. And what's depicted above the main part of the church where the altar is two, you know, giant depictions of Saint Michael and the Virgin Mary. But then off round to the side, in the sort of north, again on the north side of the wall, is a depiction of two kings. So, or look like kings. So, the official history would say that the first king is he's depicted holding his own head.
Okay.
And we think that's probably Saint Ethelbert.
Right.
And they have crowns on, etc. But Saint Ethelbert was a Northumbrian prince that came down to Mercia to marry a Mercian princess and become king of Mercia, but he wouldn't renounce his Christian faith, so he was beheaded. And he was taken, and he's buried somewhere in the region of Hereford Cathedral.
Okay.
And when you read into Saint Ethelbert, there is quite a lot of phenomena associated wherever his body was left.
Okay.
On the way into Hereford.
Yeah.
And then the second depiction again looks like a king, regally dressed, regal beard, regal crown. But in his left hand, which is held up in the air, there is a bottle or an orb or a container of some description. And again, the official history would say that would probably be St. Oswald, because he is often depicted holding an orb, or it's one of the Magi, one of the wise men from the Nativity story. But there was nothing else really to suggest it's linked to the Nativity story. It seems a bit out of the way. But my eureka moment from this whole adventure of researching it and writing the book was when I had a look at the picture on the wall. You can see that this bottle orb isn't actually on the king's hand. It's floating 2 or 3 inches above it.
Okay.
And it's been depicted deliberately that way.
Yeah.
It's been obscured. The gap between the hand and the bottom of the bottle has been obscured either through natural corrosion or somebody in the church not liking it. But when you look at the bottle, it's sort of thick round in the middle. It's got a little bit on the top. It's got what you would term to be a base, but there's undulating lines around the middle main bit of the bottle, which could suggest movement or rotation.
Yeah.
And I just think when you take it into context of everything else that's going on in Burton Dasset, is these are 14th century drawings of 9th century saints, effectively.
Yeah.
So are they telling us a story about something that happened there, or is it a depiction of a local king or dignitary that witnessed a flying orb and wanted to show that it'd be attributed to it or be connected to it, that they were in some sort of control of it by having it depicted floating above their hand? I don't suppose we'll ever know, but pictures are in the book. People can have a look or visit the church with the book and make their own mind up. But I just did really have that sort of eureka moment when I studied it and thought, that object is floating above the king's hand.
I mean, it certainly sounds credible. That they would leave. I mean, they tended to leave little clues around, didn't they? Mainly because they didn't really understand what they were seeing, so they probably attributed something religious to it, and that's why they put these images in the church, I would imagine. I mean, I don't know, I'm no expert myself, but
the fact that it survived really is incredible as well, because as you probably know, during Oliver Cromwell's reign and the Puritan era, very often the works of art, most churches were decorated, is my understanding, but they were whitewashed out, they were painted over, they were scraped off the walls. But the fact that these have survived, is again unusual.
It's quite remarkable, isn't it? Do you think it's because it was probably fairly sparsely populated and quite out of the way, or what do you think? Yeah,
I think that could be one of the reasons. That they're also very impressive, even for the time. They are very impressive. And I just think people thought, oh well, if I don't tell Oliver Cromwell, then you don't, then they'll be all right. Word just didn't get round. And funny, that is a funny link actually, because it's Edge Hill isn't not too far away, and we had the Battle of Edge Hill in 1642, I think.
Which was a big battle of the Civil War, wasn't it?
Battle of the English Civil War. And it is reported that it's described that Oliver Cromwell kept his head down in Burton Dasset during the battle.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So if he had been to the church, then he would have seen these artworks, and perhaps, despite his predilection to painting things over with whitewash, he may well have realised that there was some stronger significance to what he was looking at, which is interesting. Maybe he was told about things that were going on at that time. I mean, who knows? Do you think then that there's obviously, I mean, how far away is the site of the battle then? Because obviously there'll be an awful lot of energy, won't there, still, sort of attached to that area, and I'm wondering whether that has anything to do with it.
Yeah, it could be. So yeah, I mean the Edge Hill is only maybe 4 or 5 miles away. It's not too far at all. It's not a particularly high hill, nobody fights uphill if you can help it. But it is the area is called Edge Hill.
Yeah.
And even so I think it was October 1642 was the battle, and then the Christmas Eve of that year there was a report of ghostly noises and sounds of battle coming from the hills, which terrified the locals.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that's interesting as well. And about if we you work on the theory that in moments of high tension, emotion, horrors, the area can capture something. That would have been the first battle on British soil probably since Baden Hill, in 900 odd, and big battle. So again, that's interesting. It has been reported since, ghostly noise battles on Edge Hill. So yeah, I mean, it all sort of adds to the mystique of the area.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and I mean, obviously, you've done an awful lot of research into it, and it's pretty evident to me that when you put all the research together, it's like putting a jigsaw puzzle together, isn't it? But it becomes more and more the argument for something going on that can't be explained is more and more compelling, really, from what you've said. I mean, just going back then to the events of 1923. I mean, what sort of you said it was about 3 months. Was that it? Did it just suddenly start and suddenly stop, or have there been reported incidents since?
So there's not been any sort of it did just seem to be for that sort of that period. Okay. There's not been massive amounts of incidents anywhere else because it's high. Then there has been some reports of UFO activity flying. There was quite a good photo that you can find on the internet, which somebody just take day tripping and seen a sort of orb flashing across the sky, which I think was taken in the 90s. But there's not been any major reports there that I'm aware of, no more than perhaps any other area. But it did just seem to have this activity between this period that we're aware of, and then who knows? I mean, it'd be the 100-year anniversary next year now, which is a blinking of cosmic time, isn't it? But, so it might be that every three, if we go back to those carvings and the medieval art, which was, let's say, 14th century, actually every 600 years it isn't probably, if it is advanced technology, 600 years might be nothing to them. Might be their next, time they pass by, sort of thing, on the way from somewhere else. So, no, I don't think there's been any regular incidents there. I obviously keep an eye out, talk to locals there. I mean, the locals are good. I think they take it in their stride. As part of my research, I went to the pub, Craig. I'm willing to do these things.
It's a tough job, but somebody has to do it.
Yes, exactly. And I spoke to the local barmaid, and I had a really good chat with a chap in there who knew all about the railways and how they're linked to the military bases, etc. Okay. And I had a chat with the barmaid there and said, "Oh, have you ever heard of any stories of any strange lights or strange activity within the hills?" And she said, I think she was a bit busy, but she said, "All I know is that the Knights Templars buried all their treasure there."
All right.
and then walked off. And I try to get a bit more. Oh, really? Well, that would be something, wouldn't it? If you've got the Holy Grail buried somewhere under there. And
it's supposed to be buried at Glastonbury under Glastonbury Tor, I think, isn't it? That's one of the.
Yes, it is. But there is a temple connection where the military base is called Temple Hedwig, and so there was Templars in the area. So I guess that's where it's originated.
Yeah. It's interesting how these local legends sort of start, and then they just snowball over the years, and you end up with something that's quite. I mean, I'm sure your eyebrows went up when she said that.
I did. Yeah, I wanted to come back to try and get some more drinks out of her to try and get a bit more. She said my husband knows all about it. And I was like, oh, she knew, but
no.
I don't know.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, have you ever seen anything, or have you ever seen anything? Not necessarily in that area. Have you ever seen any UFOs yourself or UAPs? Or
I don't think I have, but I did have, and I detail it in the book. I obviously spent a lot of time up there, and we go up at different times of the night, and then particularly in February. And we stayed. Me and a friend of mine went up one February evening, and it's a fantastic place to see. We've got Orion there, all the stars are out, and we set up some observation posts, I suppose you'd call them, just to keep, find out what was happening in the area, get a sense of it all.
Yeah.
And it was in February. It was absolutely freezing, but I had a sort of flask with us and underneath a ground sheet.
Yeah.
And I did fall asleep. And when I was woke up by a noise. So the M40 is not too far away. But 3 o'clock in the morning, you can't really hear it at that stage. But I woke up to a sound, and it was like an industrial whirring, rotating sound.
Okay.
And it vroom, 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 vroom. And it got louder and louder and louder. And it's about 3 o'clock in the morning, and it seemed to be coming all around me as I was in the middle of it, from all directions, all at once. And it was incredible. I was, I know I'd just come around from sleep, but I was definitely awake because the cold just grabs you straight away.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I'm freezing. But there was this noise, and it went on for a good 5 or 6 minutes, and it seemed to be increasing. And I thought, well, what is going? And I didn't sense anything else. There was no lights above me. There was no change in the atmosphere or static or anything. But there was just this really, really loud noise. And then it just stopped, and it just went. And I woke up. My friend had also fallen asleep in the other part of the park, and I said, "Do you hear that? Do you hear that?" He said, "No, I didn't hear anything."
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay, not sure. But I carried on, sort of recorded it, of course, and I checked my watch, like all good ufologists do, make sure there's no missing time, which there wasn't. But it did go on for about six minutes or so.
That must have been quite scary, actually. That must have been quite scary.
Well, it wasn't. It was just really strange. I kept thinking, am I hearing this?
Yeah.
Am I actually? And I am, and I'm thinking to myself, I am hearing this. So what is it? And you couldn't see anything. I said there was no light, and you're up on a hill, and it's middle of the night, bit sort of clouded over, I guess. But there's nothing obvious. But it just seemed to be coming from, it wasn't just outside my ground sheet. It was everywhere, across the whole park, across the whole area.
Yeah.
From every direction and rotating. And just a couple of weeks later, I was reading through some old UFO accounts. And I came across an account in Warrentown in South Africa, where a farmer described as seeing a mothership, a giant mothership, and lots of little ships, or little balls of lights, etc.
Yeah.
Traveling over his farm. And he said that the mothership made a noise like a VW Beetle.
Right, okay.
So the VW Beetle has, as you may well know, it's a sideways rotary engine.
Yeah.
And it has that distinctive as it goes round. And as soon as I read that, I thought, that's it. That's what I heard. I heard like that noise, like a VW rotary engine. Obviously a lot louder, but that was a similar sort of thing.
That's interesting.
So I did think that was interesting, and and I was also slightly relieved that somebody else had heard something similar.
Yeah.
So it sort of give a bit corroboration to what I'd heard. So I think that's a it was an audible experience, and I'm not even sure it was UFO related, but it was very strange, and I just think that fits in with the area really.
Yeah. Got a very excitable doggy in the back.
I have, yeah. We've got a young puppy in the back.
Oh,
wow. But I think she'll be going out soon.
Yeah. Well, we've got 2 Cocker Spaniels. One's one's at 7 months old. So yeah, they're very boisterous as well. No,
it's a miniature schnauzer we've got.
Oh, bless. We're turning into Crufts now, aren't we?
Yeah, I know.
It's a really interesting story. I've never heard of it before. I did some research on you, obviously, before we did this podcast. And I mean, what's your sort of gut reaction to it?
Yeah, so you in terms of about everything you would need for a UFO event, you've got your witnesses, you've got these strange depictions in the church, you've got the layout of the land, which I detail, matches Orion's belt, and the Orion constellation is its highest currently, and it looks like it sits on top of the hills in February when the events are witnessed. But you've also got the military base. If you wanted anything else, for your checklist, military base. There's a military base at Magpie Hill, which is one of the prominent hills, overlooks it directly. And that came after the sightings, but it's one of the largest military bases in the United Kingdom. Holds the ammunition, about 60% of all ammunition for the armed forces, including probably tactical nuclear weapons at some point. So you've got, all those things that build into a UFO story are in a relatively small area. Which is why I think it is really fascinating. But in terms of what I think it is, I go back to earlier on. I think the lights described as affecting the atmosphere. There seem to be something tangible. They seem to have some sort of control. I think they're probably closer to mechanical or perhaps plasma than anything sort of organic. But I think increasingly what's been showing now is through the work of like Avi Loeb and people like this, is that we send probes to other planets. Yeah. So it makes sense that they would send some probes to us first. Yeah. Or and different civilizations looking at us would, rather than just park on the White House lawn, would actually send some people, some crafts to have a look at it, to see what's going on. And whether they focus on this area because it was a high point, so it's a bit of a reference point, before going off to check other areas. I don't know, but something was drawing them there. But I suspect it's advanced civilization. So perhaps not necessarily interstellar, but advanced civilization, probes that were drawn to this area for a particular point in time, and may well have been coming periodically for a long time. Yeah,
it certainly sounds like there's certainly some very strong historical evidence there, isn't there? Especially with what's in the church. I mean, I think that's really quite astounding, really. What's in the local church, and I'd love to have a look at that. Actually, I think that's.
Well, you must come up, Craig. Come up, and I'll show you around.
Yeah, no, it does. It sounds like an absolutely fascinating place. Where can people find the book then?
Okay, so the book's available on Amazon. The Lights Upon the Hills, Richard Rokeby, and you can get a Kindle copy or the hard copy, the paperback copy, or there's even an audio book as well. They're all on there, or at Flying Disc Press.
Yeah, brilliant. Have you got any plans to do any other work?
Yeah, I'm researching a couple of things. So I like to look at light and dark. So I'll deal with the dark first, which is looking at whether Nazi technology was responsible for some of the flying saucer sightings in the 1950s. So that is a delicate topic
Mm.
because obviously despicable regime.
Yeah.
But increasingly there was evidence to show that actually there was some sort of presence, and they had the Third Reich had some sort of hangover after the Second World War and was still in existence. Yeah. And they again, if you look at the technology, the research suggests very strongly that they had flying discs, flying saucer technology.
Yeah.
And it's what happened to that really. And was it being used either by a Fourth Reich, ourselves, or the Russians? So it's quite hard going, but fascinating. But you always got in the back of your mind the terrible loss of life that was responsible for that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So I'm looking at that. I'm also looking at a sort of working title of Weird Warwickshire, which is covering not just UFO events, but local myths and legends and ghost sightings within Warwickshire, because it's a really, like Wiltshire, it's a really ancient place, and it's a very special place, I think, Warwickshire. Yeah. And it's got these stories associated with it, all from way back when to the modern day. So I'm looking at that, and then the third project, which is just a bit of an idea that's come to me, which I think I'd like to look a bit more into, is remote viewing, and have a look at it, and have a look and see how that all works. But I think that'll be a bit more like a journey into.
Well, so yeah, it's interesting you should mention remote viewing, because if you go back through one of my earlier podcasts, it was only about 2 or 3 months ago, I interviewed a lady who is local. In fact, she's incredibly local. She actually lives in the village where I live, and I've known her for years, and I had absolutely no idea that she was a remote viewer.
Wow.
The interview that I did with her, I think it's one of the interviews that I'm most proud of, because I think what she talks about is quite astonishing. So if you need to do any research on remote viewing, then Mandy is the person you need to talk
to. Yes, I will do. I'll definitely sort of go back to and have a listen to that. Yeah, I think the military aspect and the spy aspect it really interests me as well, and how a lot of resources, money and resources were put into it at one point, and probably still are. We probably won't know much about it,
especially by the American military. I mean, there's the film, isn't there, the Men Who Stare at Goats?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, which is very close to the truth, if not the truth. But I think it's right up until the Iraq War and Afghanistan, there was still calling on remote viewers, and I think what interests me about that side of it is, I suppose there will always be the more spiritual side of it, which no doubt has its place. But I think when it's used as a tool, and it's not necessarily attributed to spiritual means of getting these messages, but actually, the expanding of your mind and using whatever you've got. And they reckon maybe tens of thousands of soldiers were trained up to try and do this. So so I think that's a bit of a another project I'd really like to put some time into.
Yeah, they sound really interesting, and I'd love to talk to you again, especially about the Nazi technology. I mean, as you quite rightly said, it's a dark subject, but I'd certainly love to talk to you about any research you've done on that at some point in the future, because I think that is a really interesting subject. So yeah, I'd love to speak to you again at some point. I've really enjoyed chatting with you about this. As I say, I didn't know anything at all about the story of the Burton Dassett UFO events, but you've really given me something to think about, and I hope that the people listening to this podcast have enjoyed it as much as I have, because I've found it really fascinating.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So I really enjoyed the talk, and hopefully we'll speak again.
Yeah, I'd love to. Definitely, I'll have to keep in touch and let me know when you finish your next project, and we'll have another chat. Thank you, and take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
I'm sure you'll agree that that was a really interesting conversation, and I'd like to thank Richard for taking the time to come on the podcast and tell us all about his book. And I urge everybody to go out and buy it because it is an absolutely fascinating story. It's extremely well researched and there's some really interesting aspects to it. So again, thank you, Richard, and all the best with any new projects you've got upcoming. Remember, you can have a look at my website, which is www.craigbryant.co.uk, where you can find information about my book, this podcast, and my upcoming projects. Thank you for listening. The Paranormal Pendle podcast will return, and in the meantime, remember to keep watching the shadows.